So guys, I want to say that this will probably be the one and only build we make for Diablo. At least for this season. And that's primarily because I've played nothing but Necromancer. I've pretty much dedicated all of my time to learning this class. And I can guarantee you, I'm gonna get some things wrong in today's video. But what is undeniable is that this build bones. Hence why we named it Bone Daddy. But for real though, this is a very nasty build. Now I've actually been playing with variations of this build pretty much since the beginning. Since the moment I unlocked Bone Spear. But Bone Spear is a core ability where it conjures this Bone Spear from the ground. It deals good damage, it pierces through enemies, and you actually have multiple unlocks here to really amplify things. You've got Enhanced Bone Spear, which allows your Bone Spear to break into 3 shards. You also have Supernatural Bone Spear, which allows Bone Spear to make the first enemy it hits vulnerable for 3 seconds. But underneath that, you have Paranormal Bone Spear, where Bone Spear has a 5% increased critical strike chance. And if Bone Spear's primary projectile critically strikes, it fires 2 additional bone shards upon being destroyed. The main takeaway from this, guys, is that a single Bone Spear has an opportunity here to hit multiple times in a single room. Now that Supernatural Bone Spear was actually the one I was using for a very long time, until I came across the Splintering Aspect, which essentially grants us Supernatural Bone Spear, but with a little extra. It also tacks on more damage, allowing the bone shards from Bone Spear to deal bonus damage to vulnerable enemies. The reason why this is so nice is that when you actually cast your Bone Spear, the first initial wave will apply vulnerable, but when it begins to split, those shards are going to be dealing more damage to those vulnerable enemies. Now, the main takeaway for this is that inside of that Bone Spear tree, you can unselect Supernatural Bone Spear and instead select Paranormal Bone Spear, thus giving you a higher chance to critically strike. And if you critically strike, you fire 2 additional bone shards upon being destroyed. All right, so we get the point. It sounds nasty. And again, if you apply this aspect to your weapon, most notably a 2-handed weapon, this amplifies things even more. Granted, if you actually get this aspect to drop on an item in the wild, it'll be even better than this. But if you just want to get the aspect, you do Goloran's Slums, which is the dungeon right here. Now moving forward in this build, I found Bone Spear to be very good, especially if you do have all of your skill tree points all the way down to where you have Ossified Essence. This unlock states that your bone skills deal 1% increased damage for each point of essence you have above 50. That's huge. The problem is A, having enough essence, and B, having enough essence to stay above 50, which led me on a quest to really figure out how can we give ourselves enough essence. Well, the first option was to try Corpse Explosion, and that seemed to be the main tool for giving us back essence, especially when combined with Grim Harvest, where consuming a corpse generates 2 essence. And I actually built into this, guys. I had the imprint where Blood Mist would trigger a Corpse Explosion on surrounding corpse. This would actually give me back essence. But what I found was that it just wasn't enough. Yes, it gave me back essence, but it took up too much time. There had to be an easier way, which actually led me to this one right here, Lucky Hit. I imprinted this on my ring, but it says that up to a 10% chance to generate 30 to 50 essence when hitting a vulnerable enemy with your bone skills. Well, hell, fellas, that is perfect. We're literally applying vulnerable right now. And 30 to 50 essence is nothing to sneeze at. But what's so beautiful about that is the 10% chance to generate. 10% doesn't sound like much, but when you have a Bone Spear that's splitting multiple times, hitting multiple targets, and not only hitting them once, but twice, 3, 4 times, you are constantly giving yourself a chance to generate essence, just as long as the enemies in front of you are vulnerable, which actually led us to go, okay, how can we apply more vulnerable? Yes, we can apply it here with our Bone Spear, but what else do we have? This is where Corpse Tendrils and the combination of Blood Mist is your best friend. And honestly, you could take it a step further with Hewed Flesh. Let's start with Corpse Tendrils. Veins burst out of a corpse, pulling enemies together and then stunning them for 3 seconds. Now the damage is nice, but when you have Enhanced Corpse Tendrils, it states that enemies who are in range of Corpse Tendrils are slowed by 50% before being pulled. And then the unlock after that, Plague Corpse Tendrils, states that enemies damaged by Corpse Tendrils are made vulnerable for 3 seconds. So guys, not only are you consolidating all of these enemies together with Corpse Tendrils, you're applying vulnerable, which is a hell of a debuff, which is stackable, I might add. And you're beautifully dipping into Bone Spear and its splitting capabilities and the essence regeneration from our lucky hit. Now, creating a corpse can work one of two ways. We have Hewed Flesh at rank 3, where our damage has up to a 12% chance to create a corpse at the target's location. Pretty nice, but a guaranteed way of doing this is just to have Blood Mist. I like Blood Mist just for getting out of scary situations, as it pretty much makes you completely immune. But if you have Ghastly Blood Mist, this states that Blood Mist leaves behind a corpse every 1 second. So just in case you get into a situation where you can't actually make a corpse, preemptively popping Blood Mist is completely okay here, guys. And if you're worried about like health and stuff and fortifying, don't worry, we're gonna get to that in just a moment. This is a build not only deadly in its damage, but also in its ability to survive. So now that we have a way in which we are now taking advantage of applying vulnerable to large groups of enemies, regenerating essence with our lucky hit, we have the extra split damage there from Bone Spear. What are some ways we can fully take advantage of this now? Because don't get me wrong, that aspect of exposed flesh is really, really nice. Splintering aspect, also very good. But we have multiple ways here, guys, to really amplify things. First, how can we split that damage up even more? Now, I know not everyone's RNG is that good, but I'm gonna throw on Deathless Visage because it is a unique that you guys that are playing Necro need to pay attention to. If you see this thing drop, even if you're not rocking a Bone Spear build, fellas, please keep this. It states that Bone Spear leaves behind echoes as it travels that explode, dealing 957 to 1,340 damage. Again, this scales depending on your level. The main takeaway for this here is that it's more damage, more opportunities to proc lucky hits, more opportunities to hit these targets multiple times, on top of how many times you're already hitting them. As long as you're applying vulnerable, you have a chance there of proccing aspect of exposed flesh. Now, considering we're going to be popping corpse tendrils a lot, this takes us to this beautiful aspect right here. Aspect of grasping veins. Guys, this increases your critical strike chance for 6 seconds when you cast corpse tendrils. You also deal bonus critical strike damage to enemies damaged by corpse tendrils. You remember that unlock underneath Bone Spear called Paranormal Bone Spear? This actually increases your critical strike chance. But again, the beautiful thing here is when you actually critically strike, it fires 2 additional bone shards. And that is further dipping into our splintering aspect. And with these increases here to critical strike chance, simply by casting corpse tendril and the bonus damage to our critical strike damage, guys, you can see where things start to compound. But now, I have to take you to the next one. The one that's really gonna amp things up. The one that sends the damage into overdrive. Aspect of Serration. This states that the Ossified Essence key passive also increases the critical strike damage of your bone skills by 1% per essence above 50% up to 60%. Now I know we just briefly touched on Ossified Essence, but it's really good. Your bone skills deal 1% increased damage for each point of essence you have above 50. And considering how much we're feeding ourselves essence over and over, we're pretty much always above 50, guys. Like, I know that sounds crazy that we're spamming our core ability and yet we still have essence. And keep in mind, if you do run into a situation where you have to generate some more essence, you can cast Bone Splinters, which is a basic attack, which does generate some essence. But in my opinion, you're not even gonna need it. But Ossified Essence with Aspect of Serration, that is what's compounding our damage here, which takes us to the rest of our skill tree and how you're gonna want to amplify your damage even more. First up, Unliving Energy, not the biggest priority, but your maximum essence is increased by 9. You can also get multiple armor pieces that can raise your maximum essence, which again feeds into this. And I know Serration does have a cap, but the point is to try to give yourself as much essence as possible. Now, my amulet actually has essence cost reduction, and if you actually have an item there that does reduce your costs, that can help you greatly. On the rest of our skill tree, we have Death's Embrace, where close enemies take 6% more damage from you, but deal 9% less damage to you. Again, this is at full unlocks. We have Death's Reach, where you deal 12% increased damage to distant enemies. Now, the reason why that's so good is because literally everything will be outside of that melee range, which means you're pretty much always going to have that 12% increase in damage. Now, to kick our damage up even more, I actually have Serration, Rapid Ossification, Compound Fracture, and Avulsion all maxed out. You have things like Serration, where your bone skills have a 0.9% increased critical strike chance for each 10 essence you have upon cast. Again, we're driving our essence up here, so this is just increasing our crit strike chance. We also have rapid ossification, where every 100 essence you do spend reduces the cooldown of your bone skills by 1.5 seconds. Only really needed if you're combining things like Bone Spirit, Bone Prison, or even your ultimate Bone Storm. And we're gonna get into that in just a moment. Now we also have Compound Fracture. Now I have 6 out of 3, but that's because I have an armor piece giving me +3 here passively. But after critically striking 10 times with bone skills, your bone skills deal 30% increased damage for 5 seconds. Really, really nice considering how often you actually get this. Guys, again, it's not one hit with Bone Spear. It's multiple chances with a variety of damage sources that can grant you those 10 crits, or at least accumulate to that point, that will give you that damage buff to your bone skills. And then finally, Avulsion, where your bone skills deal 18% increased critical strike damage to vulnerable enemies. And considering everything we just showed you about getting our enemies vulnerable, this is no problem. Now the last 2 passives I want to go over that are really helpful here. One is Standalone. This increases damage reduction by 18%. And I know it says reduce by 2% for each active minion, but you're not even going to worry about that. And I'm going to show you the books in just a moment. And we also have Memento Mori, where sacrificing both skeletal warriors and skeletal mages increases their sacrifice bonuses by 60%. That's huge, which takes us to the Books of the Dead. Guys, you want to sacrifice your minions. I know, Necromancer should be all about minions, but the damage here is just too good. First up, you want to have Skirmisher's Sacrifice Upgrade selected. This increases your strike chance by 5%. That's for Skeletal Warriors. For Skeletal Mages, you want to have Code selected, and its third unlock, where you deal 15% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. Again, we have so many ways in which we're making enemies vulnerable, so this is no problem. Now, I know you also have Shadow there, where you increase your maximum essence by 15, but considering we have so many ways to increase our essence in-game, to me, this is not necessary. And then for our Golem, hands down, you want to have Iron and the third selection. This states that you deal 30% increased critical strike damage, but of course you lose the ability to summon a Golem, aka Greg. Everything we're doing here, guys, is us committing to the damage of Necro. And Memento Mori also increases these sacrifices by a bonus of 60%. That's huge. For me personally, this means my critical strike chance is over 36%. My critical strike damage from Bone is 167%. My extra damage to vulnerable enemies is over 75%. Now, if you want to take this a step further, you could actually apply the Sacrificial Aspect to your gear. This states that your sacrifice bonuses are increased by 15 to 25%. Again, stacked on by the 60% from Memento Mori and all the bonuses you just saw there. So you can imagine how crazy the damage values can get. Now, even though the damage is wonderful, keep in mind though, guys, you gotta survive, which is actually why I took that off. Like, I love the damage, and we've done some crazy damage values with all of that together. But I did find myself kind of squishy, which is exactly why I'm using these Frostburn unique gloves, which state that we have a 23% chance to freeze enemies for 2 seconds. It's nice, and again, it depends on what I'm doing. If I'm running solo and I need to lock enemies in place, I'll put on Frostburn. If I'm running with a group and I'm trying to just maximize damage, then I turn around and throw on these other gloves, and we get some crazy damage values. Our critical strike damage with Bone jumps up above 200%. Our critical strike chance is still at 35%. Again, there's a balance here between being both an extremely lethal Necromancer, but simultaneously, you have to stay alive. Which brings us to some of the other aspects that I'm rocking, as well as what I'm using in my skill tree. First up, Aspect of the Protector is still one of my favorite aspects in the game, where damaging an elite grants you a barrier. This lasts for 10 seconds. It can only occur every 30 seconds, but man, it is so nice. But keep in mind, that's not the only thing that can keep you alive. I'm also rocking Bone Storm. Now, Bone Storm is good when combined with Aspect of Shielding Storm, where each time that Bone Spear damages an enemy, you gain a barrier equal to a percentage of your base life for 10 seconds. Now, I actually have a pretty good roll on mine. Mine is equal to 5% of my base life. Now, I am rocking Bone Storm, but I'm not doing the complete spec here for Bone Storm. I'm not doing Prime Bone Storm and Supreme Bone Storm. I know that Supreme Bone Storm increases critical strike chance, and it is nice. And if you have enough points to allocate that over, by all means, guys, do so. I'm just personally investing elsewhere, and so I just keep Bone Storm just for protection means, just for popping it, proccing that aspect and giving myself a barrier. Now I want to talk about other ways you're going to be staying alive. Number one, blood mist is huge. Anytime you're in a sketchy situation, blood mist will save your life. It allows you to just dip. If you're proccing ghastly blood mist, you're dropping corpse. And as soon as you come out of blood mist, you can cast tendrils, which can consolidate all these enemies together. But another really good one is necrotic corpus. When a corpse is formed from your skills or your minions, you fortify for 6% base life. Now I really like this because I have a number of ways that I'm creating corpse. Whether it's from hued flesh, whether it's from blood mist, it really doesn't matter. These are just some ways in which I'm able to fortify and stay alive. Now I'm also taking advantage of bone prison. Now considering I have so many ways to apply vulnerable, I don't need ghastly bone prison. Instead, we have just 1 point in bone prison, another one in enhanced bone prison, where if an enemy is trapped by bone prison, you gain 15 essence, plus an additional 5 per enemy traps. This is nice if you need to top off essence, especially if you're trying to get above 50. And then we have dreadful bone prison, where you fortify for 5% base life for each enemy trapped by bone prison. Again, guys, it's just little things like this that can help keep you alive. The other big one is just the fact that my weapon heals me on kill. Now, as far as the last aspect you need to have, I have this one right here, guys, where I have a 20% increase in crowd control duration. This is nice for what I'm trying to do. And while enemies are unstoppable, I deal 50% increased damage to them. But honestly, slot whatever you want here, guys. That's on my boots there. We do need to talk about our Paragon, though. I am by no means an expert at this. I do have the Essence Glyph Socket and the Sacrificial Glyph Socket. Now, the Sacrificial Glyph Socket is pretty straightforward. It grants 36% bonus to all magic nodes within range. That's nice, I guess. The main takeaway is you gain 10% increased damage while you have no active minions, which is exactly what I'm doing. But for the Essence Glyph Socket, for every 5 dexterity purchase within range, core skills deal increased critical strike damage. Now, I've been heavily investing in this. And it's important to note, too, where you place these, right? Because that can make a difference. Again, I'm still learning here. But underneath that, it says that critical strikes deal 22% increased damage to enemies that are not healthy. Now, those are the two main glyph sockets that I've focused on. As far as your Paragon page, though, I've selected Bone Grafts, simply because there's so many things here that benefit my build directly. Primarily, the Bone Graft legendary node, where hitting enemies with a bone skill increases your damage by 1% and your maximum essence by 3 for 8 seconds. And this stacks up to 8% increased damage and 24 maximum essence. Again, the main takeaway on this, guys, that maximum essence is the kicker, right? Like, having anything above 50 is so key here. Now, again, I do want to mention my Paragon board is not perfect. Like, I'm still working out the kinks. But if you are limited on points, remember, you can rotate this board. You can literally rotate Bone Graft all the way down and immediately march up and unlock it. And what's even more wild, and something I'm just now figuring out, you can attach another Paragon board, which if you are going to do that, I would honestly suggest probably Scent of Death. It has a legendary node which states that with at least 2 corpse nearby, you gain 15% damage reduction, and with no corpse nearby, you deal 15% increased damage. Pretty nice, guys. So fellas, that is my one and only build for this season. It's probably going to be how I'm going to do every season, guys. I'm just going to commit to one class and try to do everything I can on that one class, and that's about it. With that being said, Necromancer was looked at as being one of the weaker of the classes, and yeah, it is kind of squishy. It starts off very strong, gets a little weaker in that mid-level range, like around 50, but once you start fleshing things out and really start tacking in these pieces together and locking in that Bone Daddy build, it gets crazy. The last aspect that I think I would try on this build would be Aspect of Torment, which says that critical strikes with bone skills increase your essence regeneration. Granted, this aspect is not dropped for me. Now, is it as good as Aspect of Exposed Flesh? For how I'm utilizing this build, I don't think so, guys. That 30 to 50 essence, I know it's only a 10% chance, but simply hitting a vulnerable enemy could grant you that is huge. And that's exactly how I'm always staying topped off on essence. With that being said, though, if you do have that other aspect and you do combine all these things together, you can slot out Bone Storm, guys. You don't have to rock that. And don't get me wrong, it's nice to have an ultimate. The reason why I bring that up is because Bone Spirit does an incredible amount of damage. And if you have enough essence to really take take advantage of this, you can be doing upwards in the millions of damage with a single hit. I'm talking 2, 3, 4 million damage with Bone Spirits. Keep in mind though, it's not exactly feasible, or at least I have not found the build to be fully feasible with this. When it comes to clearing ads, Bone Spear is the clear option for me. And even when it comes to dealing damage to a boss, Bone Spear is still very, very good because of the multiple hits. Bone Spirit is if you just want to see those big ego numbers. And yes, it is sexy to look at and a option. And if I actually lock down that other aspect and I have a means of regenerating essence almost infinitely, then yes, you'll be seeing us doing another build for Necros. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching. And as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.